Devon Turnbull of Ojas Audio began his career as a DJ and fashion designer, eventually collaborating with the late Virgil Abloh, artistic director of Louis Vuitton menswear. Parallel to his work in the fashion industry, Devon nurtured a love for horn-loaded speakers, idler drive turntables, and single-ended triode tube-driven amplifiers. Originally trained as an audio engineer, Devon soon accepted commissions to manufacture his Ojas line of loudspeakers for venues across the world. Ojas is now Devon's main focus. His Artbook shelf speakers have sold like high-end audio hotcakes off both his Ojas site and Abloh's Canary Yellow website. Basing his speaker designs on classic Altec drivers and amplification favored by Cognoscente in Japan and France, Devon has become an influencer of major proportions and perhaps the future of high-end audio, bridging a youthful clientele with classic designs based on 60-year-old components.
I learned from the culture around the world that has sort of appropriated those components and used them in a new, more refined way. But it's not like I'm competing with Altec because for all intents and purposes, they don't exist anymore. I don't really even think about this in terms of because I don't run my business in a conventional way. And, I don't do shows. I don't think about market share because, to be totally honest, I have no idea how big the market is or what my share of it is. Like I was saying, things that seem like a big deal to me and like a huge success to me, I have no idea if a more experienced manufacturer would be like, oh, that's pretty average.
No, we were talking just a second ago, the fact that you sold, just off the top of your head without looking at actual numbers, 250 of your Artbook shelf speaker, which is there to your right behind you. That's a good year for anybody.
Yeah, I think that number is probably over about 2 years. But however, I also don't really know how many of those I can sell because when we are able to get them in stock, we'll usually stock 30 to 50 kits or units, and then they almost always sell out in half a day to maybe 3 days.
Yeah, there are different colors of the Artbook shelf speaker, but only the pewter gray is still available on your site. The upgraded one with the horn, that's gone as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that there's another site that's more of a kind of a fashion design object site called Essence that sells them, and they have some colors. They only sell them fully assembled, and I think they have a few things in stock. But the kit product that we sell for a easier reaching price point, around $2,000.
That's the speaker there to your right.
These guys, yeah.
Without the horn.
Correct. Well, then we sell a kit that you can modify the driver as it ships from JBL. The way we get it is a coaxial. So there's a small compression driver mounted on the back of the woofer that fires through a small horn, on axis with the woofer, and it sounds beautiful like that. And in some situations, it sounds better like that. But obviously I'm a fan of controlled dispersion and bigger horns, and I started thinking about what could this sound like with a horn, and I tried many horns. It's a screw mount, so anything that I could really easily mount it to. And eventually I found this really obscure replacement part that JBL still makes. It's part of the progressive transition series of horns, this guy. And it was actually designed to work with this driver on a two-way PA speaker. And it works really well. So that's another thing that, I get as many of the horns as I can, and then we made a kit basically so that we sort of walk you through removing the compression driver from the woofer. But when you pull it off, you're left with a hole in it, that runs right through the center of the woofer. So you've essentially made another vent. So we make a plate and a gasket that closes that off so it's sealed. And or rather not a vent, like all woofers are vented in some way, but actually like a port, like a box port. So you want to obviously get rid of that. So we make a plate and a gasket that seals that off. And then we add an L pad for a little bit more control over the balance between the horn and the woofer. And you know, a whole set of like wire and everything you need to modify the existing speaker to have the horn in it, the brackets, all that.
How much is that DIY kit adding the horn to the book?
We've been charging $350 for that kit.
That includes the horn?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of insane.
Yeah, I mean,
Wow.
it's again, you know, I could probably be more strategic in my pricing, but our pricing is generally pretty straightforward. Like, what do we need to charge to get this to people?
Wow.
You know, stuff is not cheap, I know, but in no way is any of this stuff inflated just based on like what I feel like the opportunity is.
And you live in New York and you can charge those kind of prices. So correct me if I'm wrong, the speaker, the Artbook shelf speaker is 5100 assembled, the kit is 1950.
That's about right, depending on finishes and options and stuff like that. Yeah, we started doing, we've been producing a lot of speakers with this really beautiful rotary cut red oak veneer on the birch ply. And that's sort of started to become something that people recognize as like a branded thing for Ojas speaker. So we just did our first drop with that on the kit, and that raises the price. I think we're charging like $23.50 for that kit. The veneer and the material we have it made, it's expensive.
What does the word Ojas mean? Does it stand for something else?
Yeah, Ojas is a name I've used since I was like a teenager. Its origin is Sanskrit. When I was born, my parents were both teachers of transcendental meditation, so I was kind of raised in the back of TM centers and went to a high school that was 100% dedicated to like that
Where
kind of
were you
teaching.
raised?
Well, I'm from New York originally, but my parents were running TM centers on Long Island when I was a kid. And then we moved to Iowa, where the sort of like U.S. capital for the TM movement is. There's a high school there, and that's where I went to high school.
You don't seem like a New Yorker for some reason. Maybe because you're so calm.
That's 4 hours of meditation as part of my high school curriculum. Now, I actually don't practice TM anymore.
Right.
But I mean, I would say certainly. I mean, literally, when I was in high school, we had about 4 hours a day of meditation. So there's definitely, I think, something to have learned from that experience.
You're a calm person. And your system, even when you're playing music, emanates a certain calm. This is such a relaxed sounding system. It was just kind of surprising considering how big the horns are. And that's an original Altec horn?
This is an original Altec horn. We're making now a replica of this horn and also variations of it. Well, actually, I shouldn't say replica. We're making sort of an improved version of this horn now, where we make a sort of like, I don't really know exactly what to call this part, but Altec did a really good job of it when they're making these horns. And I've been told by people who worked at the factory that the guys who built these horns were the highest paid factory employees, and Altec never stopped losing money on these horns. It's very hard to make these horns because there's so much handwork involved. And they did a really good job, but one of the things that's really challenging to do when making a multi-cell horn like this is where all the individual, like, you know, cells, like these trumpets, where they all meet in the throat of the horn. It's very hard to get a very sharp edge when you have 15 squares all stacking up against each other. So with a lot of horns, a lot of the like reproduction horns and like, the DIY horns people make out of wood and stuff, you'll sometimes look in the back of the throat in the entry to the horn, and you'll see like a lot of hard, like faceted surfaces, so that can cause a first order reflection in the throat of the horn, where as the sound wave is pressurizing this compression chamber, there's bounce back sometimes. So I think that is a very important part of the manufacturing of these horns. And so what we've done, or what we're doing, is we're making the horns again out of metal. I mean, I absolutely love the 15 cell horn. It's one of the most magical pieces of vintage gear that I've experimented with a good amount. And particularly the 15 cell, the dispersion is just like such a magic, larger than life, cinematic kind of presentation.
Is that horn in the cabinet below it looks like two 12s? Is that a product you're selling?
Yeah, I call it the Ojas W cabinet as an ode to the quite famous Onken W design that a lot of people mistake this for. Aesthetically, I referenced the Onken W as a sort of a nod to this heritage, but the Onken W cabinet is way bigger than this. The Onken W cabinet runs two 15-inch Altec, usually Altec drivers. I'm sure originally it was the actual Onken woofers made in Japan. But it's an enormous enclosure and traditionally run with a 300 hertz multi-cell horn above it. So the whole thing would never fit in this room. But I love the double 12-inch Altec configuration. Altec made a cabinet called the 9844 with these two 414 12-inch woofers in it. The 414 is a 12-inch version of the really classic 416 15-inch driver that Altec made. And yeah, I used to build cabinets for a single 414, and 10 plus years ago, you could get very inexpensively these 9844 cabinets that were loaded with two, and initially I would buy them and just harvest the drivers out of them. But then I started listening to them, like, how could you not? And they're really beautiful sounding mid-bass boxes. So this cabinet has more to do with the Altec 9844 than it does the Onken W, but I wanted to make this look like the Onken W, like I said, just kind of as like a continuity to like this kind of sound system culture. It's like a mini in a lot of ways.
And I see an Ojas amplifier here. Is that a commercial product?
Yeah, we make half dozen or a dozen of those a year in Japan with a partner.
Is there a name for that amplifier?
It's a single-ended 2A3 amp. I make it with a guy whose name is Koji Wakabayashi. He runs a company called Eiffel in Japan. And I first visited Koji, I think in 2007 or somewhere around 2007. I had been trading with him for a long time. He has like an import-export business. So he sells a lot of Western Electric and Altec gear in Japan that he sources from around the world. And he sells a lot of Japanese components to the DIY market around the world. So anything from, Japanese made capacitors, Fostex drivers, quite a few Japanese component level manufacturers that he exports the products. So I had been buying things from him for a while, for years, and knew him pretty well through email, and he's really responsive. And one day he was like, maybe it took him 2 days to reply to an email, and he said, like, oh, I apologize for my slowness. I'm very busy. I'm building the Vintage Audio Museum. And he was also a distributor for a Japanese driver manufacturer called GIP Laboratory. GIP, I assumed he was directly related to GIP because he promoted it on his site and he had a huge demo system of their stuff. So I just kind of thought one day after work I'd go to this guy's, kind of like you're coming here, you know, casually take the train across town, check this out, it'll be really cool. Koji got really excited. He's like, yes, please come here. And because I had sent him an email saying I would love to come and check out Eiffel and GIP Laboratory. And he's like, yes, and I've been meaning to visit the GIP guys, so we should come here, stay here for a couple days, and then we'll go to GIP. GIP, by the way, is known around the world for making the highest quality Western Electric reproduction drivers. Wow. So they make the TA4181 18-inch field coil driver. They make the 597, all the most desirable Western Electric field coil drivers. They make like very, very good replicas of them. Wow. And Koji has one of only a few full Western Electric Miraphonic systems set up in his place. Wow. It's quite an experience. He's got, 16A Western Electric horn. He's got just, I don't even know, countless amounts of vintage Altec and Western stuff. And that's just on that one floor. Then he's got like, upstairs is the kind of more international. So he'll have like an area dedicated just to vintage Japanese gear, vintage British gear, vintage. It's a very fun place to visit.
I want to ask you more about Mr. Wakabayashi in a second, but when you sell the 2A3 amp, what does it sell for?
$6,000.
Okay, and what is this? Is this a phonostage? Just small?
Yeah. So this is something I've been developing with Steve Berger. You know Steve? Yeah, this is our hopefully going to soon be commercialized phono stage and / passive preamp.
Wow. And there's behind that some sort of a Luxman integrated amp?
Yeah, the Luxman I'm using right now because when I added the Super Sub, this thing is independently amplified. So my system right now is bi-amped. And I needed 2 buffered line outs to go into the full range amp and to go into the sub amp. And the Luxman has that. I had it here anyway, and I'm just using that as like a sort of a line stage buffer amp right now. Okay. But it also gives me the ability to have like a remote controlled volume, which is kind of nice.
Yeah. So you have a Gerard 301 with, are those Ortofon arms, both of them?
Yeah, both vintage arms, and there's a RMG 309, which is the most common Ortofon arm designed for use with the G-type SPU, and the RF297, which was originally designed to be the OEM arm on the EMT 927 turntable. And it predates the SPU, which when that was introduced came in this now standardized 52 millimeter mounting collar to tip distance. The earlier Ortofon cartridges, which are occasionally still made, the A-type, have a much shorter distance from the mounting collet to the... So if you put an A-type SPU on a typical tone arm, the overhang will be like 20 millimeters off. Or I don't know exactly how many offhand, but it's you've got like this much distance as opposed to that much distance.
Wow. And what's that amplifier with the giant transformers on it?
The giant transformers and the giant unobtainable tube. This is an amp that was designed by Arthur Lege, who's an important triode guy.
I've heard that name.
He was a professor up in Albany, and all the guys who have been a huge influence on me, from Koji to J.C. Morrison to Herb, all refer to Arthur as being almost like a mentor of my mentors, I would say. I don't know if I'm misrepresenting that, but I think that that's true. And so Arthur and Koji, my guy in Japan, were also quite close. And so Koji built that amp, but it's one of Arthur's designs.
How many watts is that amplifier?
So it's running a tube that most people have never heard of, Western Electric 248A.
Are those the really unusual looking tubes?
I would say so. Let me grab it. This is
I'll do a close-up on it.
It's the only tube that I wear a glove when handling, because this thing inside the tube, when it's heated, is like, I've heard 3,000 something degrees. Western Electric 248A with a brass bass. This thing dates to probably the late 20s. And it's a predecessor to the 211. The 211 in single-ended Class A operation is somewhere in the high teens. To find a pair of those tubes is, even some of the most experienced tube collectors and engineers I know, they've never heard of that tube.
Wow.
I can't even find a data sheet for it. They are pretty impractical in audio circuits because they have very high output, very beautiful sound, but in order to run them, you need like more than 1,000 volts of B+ voltage.
Wow.
So to make one of these amps is
dangerous.
Very dangerous. Yeah, you could definitely die poking around inside that thing. You can get blasted right out of the room. These are very esoteric audio amplifiers.
Even with your collaboration with the late Virgil Abloh at Canary Yellow, that must have been a horrible thing for you. I'm sorry the loss of your friend. It's amazing that you sold this equipment based on 60-year-old technologies to what I assume is a largely young clientele. So the $50 million question is, how do you make old school sellable? How did you do this?
I can't say it was like a strategy or a plan that I had, tentatively figured out. I didn't get into this to sell stuff. I got into this as a hobbyist, and I can still consider myself a hobbyist. What I do is really kind of, I see, when you can do your hobby on a level that supports your livelihood and the infrastructure that you want to build around it, it's a beautiful thing. I think that maybe you need a little bit of like a backstory, or I need a little bit of a backstory to talk through to even start to answer that question.
The cynic in me would say, you already had this amazing hookup, your gear went on part of the Canary Yellow site, you're known in that community, Virgil, you work with Virgil, people just say, oh, this is a cool thing now, like vinyl, and they bought it. I don't think that can be the case. $5,000 isn't like a record purchase or something.
When I was doing this initially, I actually told myself I really don't want to turn this into a business, because I had a couple times over, even in my 20s, gotten into something out of passion, turned it into a business, and learned to hate it. I did that with, running a clothing brand. I did that with, the stress of running a business like that, and having to keep up with cycles that consumers demand it's exhausting enough to make you fall out of love with the thing that you loved doing in the first place.
What was your position with Virgil?
Friend, first and foremost, and then, sometimes collaborator, sometimes business partner. Basically, Virgil also loves music. He loves reproduction equipment.